Right now, on March 25, 2026, four major developments are reshaping the geopolitical landscape across three continents, and every single one of them is connected in ways that most newsrooms are not telling you. Today, we are covering the following breaking stories. Iran is analyzing a 15-point American proposal to end the war in the Gulf, while Trump publicly claims Tehran desperately wants a deal but is afraid to admit it. Meanwhile, inside Russia, the government has ordered an internet blackout in Moscow, and Ukrainian drones have just struck two of Russia's most critical Baltic oil export terminals, triggering fires visible from Finland. These are not isolated events. They are pieces of the same collapsing architecture of global power, and you need to understand all of them together. Let us start with what is happening between the United States and Iran, because the speed of these developments is extraordinary. On this Wednesday, March 25th, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed publicly that Tehran is reviewing a proposal sent by the Trump administration through Pakistani intermediaries. This is not a small thing. For weeks, Iranian officials had categorically rejected any notion of direct or indirect talks with Washington. The public posture was defiance. But now Araghchi is standing in front of state television saying that ideas were transmitted and that senior Iranian leadership is considering a response. He was careful with his words. He said that exchanging messages through mediators does not constitute negotiations with the United States. That distinction matters, because inside Iran, being seen as negotiating with Washington under military pressure is politically dangerous, possibly fatally so for the officials involved. The proposal itself, as described by three sources familiar with the Israeli cabinet, is a 15-point document with extraordinarily demanding terms. The United States is reportedly asking Iran to remove its stockpiles of highly enriched uranium from the country entirely, halt all uranium enrichment, restrict its ballistic missile program, and cut off financial and military support to its regional allies, including Hezbollah and Houthi forces in Yemen. These are not modest requests. These are terms that would functionally dismantle the strategic infrastructure Iran has spent 4 decades building. And here is what makes this moment so significant. The fact that Tehran is even reviewing this proposal, rather than immediately and publicly rejecting it the way it has done in the past, tells us something real about the military and economic pressure the country is currently under. The context is brutal. On February 28th of this year, the United States and Israel launched a joint military operation against Iran. Since then, American forces have struck more than 10,000 targets inside Iranian territory, according to Admiral Brad Cooper, head of U.S. Central Command. More than 1,340 people have been killed, including the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei himself. Iran has retaliated with drone and missile attacks against Israel and Gulf states hosting American military installations. 13 American service members have been killed and roughly 290 wounded. The war is real, it is ongoing, and both sides are taking significant damage. Trump's comments Wednesday night at a Congressional Republican National Committee fundraising dinner added another layer to this already complex situation. The president said Iran is eager to negotiate and wants a deal badly, but is afraid to say so publicly because its leadership fears being killed either by its own population or by the United States. He said American forces are, in his words, decimating Iran, and he deliberately avoided the word war in favor of the phrase military operation, a legal and political distinction that allows the administration to act without a formal congressional declaration. Trump said he has never seen a head of state who wanted his own position less than Iran's current leadership. The message was unmistakable. Washington believes Tehran is broken militarily and psychologically, and is simply waiting for Iranian officials to accept that reality at the negotiating table. But here is the crucial point, and this is where the analysis gets complicated. Israel is watching these negotiations with deep suspicion. A senior Israeli defense official told reporters that Israel doubts Iran will accept the proposed terms, and, more importantly, Israel fears that American negotiators might make concessions that weaken the final agreement. Israel wants any deal to explicitly preserve its right to conduct preemptive strikes against Iranian nuclear or military infrastructure. That is a demand that Iran will almost certainly never accept as a formal condition of any agreement, which means the negotiations, if they happen at all, are entering a triangle of competing interests where American, Iranian, and Israeli objectives are fundamentally misaligned on at least one critical point. Now, let us move to what is happening inside Russia, because the news from Moscow this week is as significant in its own way as the Gulf War. The independent Russian media outlet The Bell reported on March 24th, citing sources inside the Russian IT sector, that the order to shut down Internet access in Moscow came directly from the Russian government. Specifically, the Federal Security Service, known by its Russian acronym FSB, received instructions from above to cut Internet connectivity in response to unspecified security threats. The FSB then delivered maps to Internet service providers marking which areas of Moscow should go dark, while simultaneously making clear to those providers that the decision was not theirs and came from the highest levels. This is the first time since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 that the Russian capital itself experienced Internet disruptions of this magnitude. The blackout lasted nearly a month. In early March, Russian authorities implemented what they called a whitelist system for mobile Internet, allowing access only to approved sites including pro-government social media, state media outlets, and official government websites. Everything else was blocked. Interestingly, at least 2 of the areas in Moscow that lost Internet access corresponded geographically to locations where air defense systems had been deployed, suggesting the blackout may have been connected to operational security concerns around those installations. The implications of this are layered. Russia is now applying to its own capital the kind of information control it has previously used in conflict zones and in restive regions. The Kremlin appears to be treating Moscow itself as a potentially unstable environment that requires the same management tools used in war zones. And the Russian government is now moving toward a total ban on Telegram, the encrypted messaging application used by tens of millions of Russians for news and communication. Regulators began blocking voice calls on Telegram in the summer of 2025 and are now moving toward a complete prohibition that could take effect as early as April. When a government starts severing its own population's access to information at this scale, inside its own capital city, it is a signal of internal fragility that deserves much more attention than it is currently receiving in Western media. If you are watching this channel and you want to stay informed about the real dynamics shaping the world right now, subscribe and hit the notification bell. This kind of analysis, connecting the dots across multiple theaters simultaneously, is what we do here, and there is a lot more coming. Now to the news that could move energy markets globally. On March 25th, Ukraine's security service, known as the SBU, announced a major drone operation targeting Russian oil export infrastructure on the Baltic Sea. Long-range drones operated by the SBU's Alpha Special Operations Unit struck the U.S. Teluga oil terminal in Russia's Leningrad region, roughly 900 kilometers from the launch point. Storage tanks holding oil and petroleum products were hit directly, and a massive fire broke out at the port. This follows a separate Ukrainian drone strike on the port of Primorsk on March 23rd, just 2 days earlier, which also resulted in fires that were still burning as of today. Reuters described the combined attacks as among the largest strikes on Russian oil export infrastructure in 4 years of war. The smoke from the fires at Ust-Luga was reportedly visible from Finnish territory, which gives you a sense of the scale of what was burning. Russia has suspended oil and petroleum product exports from both Primorsk and Ust-Luga following the attacks. These 2 ports are not minor facilities. They are critical nodes in Russia's Baltic energy export network, and disrupting them, even temporarily, has real consequences. Reuters analysts noted that the suspension of exports from these terminals will likely increase uncertainty in global oil markets, particularly given the simultaneous conflict in the Middle East that is already creating supply anxiety. When you have Gulf oil infrastructure threatened by the Iran war at the same time that Russian Baltic exports are being struck by Ukrainian drones, you are looking at a potential convergence of supply shocks that energy traders and policymakers cannot ignore. Think about this for a moment. Ukraine, outgunned and outmanned in the conventional ground war, has developed one of the most effective long-range drone strike programs in the history of asymmetric warfare, hitting a target 900 kilometers away with precision, not once but repeatedly within the span of a week, and striking the economic lifeline of a country with the world's largest nuclear arsenal. That is a remarkable strategic capability. The attacks are not just tactical. They are strategic communications. Every barrel of Russian oil that fails to reach a European or Asian buyer is a direct reduction in the revenue Russia uses to fund its military operations in Ukraine. What we are watching across all four of these news developments is a world in which the old rules of escalation management are breaking down in real time. The United States is conducting what its own president calls a military decimation of Iran, while simultaneously attempting to negotiate a diplomatic settlement. Russia is shutting down the internet in its own capital, while its oil infrastructure burns in the Baltic. Ukraine is striking deep inside Russian economic territory with drone technology that barely existed at the start of the war, and Iran is reviewing American peace proposals it cannot afford to accept and cannot afford to reject. The world you are living in right now is not the world of 6 months ago. The geopolitical order is being rewritten under extraordinary pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. What happens next in the Iran negotiations? What Russia does in response to losing its Baltic oil exports? Whether the Kremlin's information blackout signals something larger coming inside Russia? These are questions that do not have clear answers today, but they are the questions that matter. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Iran will ultimately accept a deal with the United States? And what do you make of Russia cutting internet access in its own capital? Let us talk about it.